Good morning. Thank you for being patient. Evidently, we have many buses of students not able to get here because of the traffic. I'm going to ask you to put all your cameras down, put your cell phones away. We're going to have a conversation. Let me start on a somber note. I hope for you young people it'll be a liberating reflection. GDP is slowing all over the world. And the reason this is happening is productivity is declining all over the world. And the result is unemployment is very high, especially for the young millennial generation trying to find work in the 21st century. Our economists are projecting 20 more years of low productivity. And let me do the numbers for you. We've had two industrial revolutions in the 19th and 20th century. And here's where we stand this morning. Arguably, half the human race, all of us, are far better off than our ancestors were before we began this industrial way of life. Granted, I think it's also fair to say that 40% of the human race making $2 a day or less are not really appreciably better off than their ancestors were 200 years ago. 1 billion people making $1 a day, we could say they're probably worse off than their ancestors were. So while half the human race is doing better, the other half of the human race not particularly well, the very rich among us have really, really done well. Listen to this. The 7 richest people in the world today, we could put them in this row. Their combined wealth now equals the accumulated wealth of 1/2 the human beings living on Earth. That's 3.5 billion people. There's something wrong with the way the human family is organizing itself on this planet. Excuse me, you'll have to put that in the back of the room. You have to go back in the back. It's clear that we are in a long-term decline for the great industrial era. But now we have a more serious crisis. After 2 centuries of industrial activity, we've essentially dug up the burial grounds of the Carboniferous era, a previous period of history. We dug up all those fossil fuel organic remains, and we transformed them into an industrial society, fossil fuels. Now we have spewed so much carbon dioxide and methane and nitrous oxide into the atmosphere of this planet that it's not allowing the sun's heat to get back off the planet back into space. We are in real-time climate change. This is no longer a theory, no longer on the horizon. It's here in Germany. It's all over the world.
It's in California.
We're going to get to that in a moment. What's terrifying about climate change, I'm going to describe what climate change really does because no one knows. Not even our politicians can explain it. Climate change changes the water cycles of the Earth. That's what you're never told. We have an atmosphere, a biosphere, a lithosphere, a magnetosphere, all interacting with the key sphere, the hydrosphere, water. We are the watery planet. Our ecosystems have developed over millions of years based on the water, the clouds that traverse the ecosystems. Here's the problem. For every 1 degree that the temperature goes up on this Earth because of industrial-induced global warming emissions, for every 1 degree that temperature is going up, the atmosphere is sucking up 7% more precipitation from the ground. In other words, the heat on Earth is forcing that precipitation from the ground into the clouds. So we're getting more concentrated precipitation in the clouds and more extreme, violent, dramatic, completely unpredictable water events. This is climate change. We are experiencing massive snow. 8 feet in Boston, that's the new normal for snow. We are getting flooding across every continent, massive spring floods everywhere, destroying infrastructure and ecosystems. People are dying. In the Carolinas, in the United States, in those 2 states, and across the Southeast, they say that these storms happen once every 1,000 years. We now have them all year long. We are getting droughts all over the world. Germany has been in drought all year. You've had no rain here this year. In California, the entire state this morning is on fire from droughts, the entire state. Hundreds of thousands of people have been evacuated. People are dead, burned. This is the new normal. We have category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes. In my country, a couple of years ago, when the big hurricane hit New Orleans, we said, well, this happens once every 1,000 years. We've now had Katrina and Sandy and Florence and Michael. We have parts of the southeast U.S. right now underwater. Underwater. This is the new normal. It's going to get worse and worse. And here's what I want to tell you. Our ecosystems cannot catch up with a runaway water cycle after millions of years of adapting to a traditional water cycle. They are collapsing. The ecosystems are collapsing in real time. Our scientists now tell us we are in the 6th extinction event of life on this earth. No one even knows about it. It's the most dramatic moment in human history, and no one even knows it's happening. We have had 5 mass extinction events on this earth in 450 million years, way before humans were here. We're the babies. Anatomically modern humans have been here 200,000 years. We're the babies. Each time there was an extinction event, it happened really quickly. There was a feedback in loops on exponential curves and quick die out. And on the average, 10 million years to get new life back on Earth. We are in the 6th extinction event in your generation. And our scientists tell us that we could lose over half the species of vertebrates and invertebrates across the entire Earth in the next 7 decades. The last time we had an extinction event of this magnitude was 65 million years ago. We are asleep. And it's going to be up to your generation to move forward really quickly to see if we can save our planet. So what do? We have an economic crisis, and now it's given rise to the most impressive crisis in the history of our species, real-time climate change, right now. We need a new economic vision for the world. It needs to be compelling. We need a game plan to deliver that economic vision. It needs to come very quick. We have to be off a carbon-based civilization in less than 30 years if we're going to make it. Now, the UN Climate Panel just issued their big report, their final report here. And they said that unless we totally transform the economy, the infrastructure of the entire planet within the next 30 years, the feedback loops are going to take us over the end. This is the UN panel of thousands and thousands of scientists from every Academy of Science, and they don't think we can do it because it's such a huge experiment. I'm here today to tell you there is a chance we can do it. And I'm going to lay out the plan that we've developed in Europe and China, the formal plan to do it, but it's going to be up to your generation to make sure we can try to beat this out. I know this is difficult to hear. So we need to step back and ask this question. How do the great economic revolutions in history occur? The great economic paradigm shifts. If we know how they occur, we'll get a roadmap and a compass for your generation so you can charter a new journey very quickly to transform Europe, China, America, and the world to a post-carbon ecological society. There have been at least 7 major economic paradigm shifts in history. They're very interesting. They share a common denominator. At a moment of time across civilization, 3 defining technologies emerge and converge to create what we call in engineering a general purpose technology platform, an infrastructure that fundamentally changes the way we manage, power, and move economic activity, social activity, and governance. What are those 3 technologies? Number 1, new communication technologies to more efficiently manage our economic activity, our social life, and governance. That's obvious. Number 2, new sources of energy to more efficiently power our economic life, our social life, and governance. That's obvious. And number 3, new modes of mobility, transportation, logistics to more efficiently move our economic life, social life, and governance. When communication revolutions converge with new energy regimes, new modes of mobility, it fundamentally changes the way society manages, powers, and moves its activity. It changes our temporal spatial orientation. It changes our business model. It changes our governance. It changes our consciousness. I'm going to give you 2 examples. You read about the first industrial revolution in Britain in the 19th century and the second industrial revolution in Europe and the United States in the 20th century. So the Brits take us into the first industrial revolution with communication, energy, mobility, revolution. The Brits invent steam-powered printing. No more German manual print presses. Too slow. Steam-powered printing, really quick. It allowed us to create cheap books for public school systems that were emerging, and newspapers and magazines and journals. That communication revolution then came together with the telegraph system. So steam-powered printing and the telegraph, that communication revolution, then in Britain converged with a new source of energy, coal, harvested by the British invention, the steam engine. Then here's the ingenious part. The Brits put the steam engine on rails, locomotives, national transportation, railroads. Communication, energy, mobility, industrial life. Second industrial revolution, the United States, communication, energy, and mobility again. The telephone was a big deal. Now, I know all of you in the internet generation think, wow, this is cool, but imagine for the first time in history, human beings talking into a device virtually and someone listening 10,000 miles away. Bizarre. Later, radio and television. Those communication technologies in the United States converge with a new source of energy, cheap Texas oil wells. Then Henry Ford borrowed the Daimler internal combustion engine and put everybody in cheap vehicles. That second industrial revolution, communication, energy, and mobility, moved us from urban life to suburban life, interstate highway systems, shopping malls, travel and tourism. It took the whole world through the 20th century. That second industrial revolution peaked in July 2008. That was a big month. In July 2008, Brent crude oil hit a record peak of $147 a barrel on world markets. And when it hit that peak, the entire global economy shut down. That was the great economic earthquake of the industrial era. The collapse of the financial market with the subprime mortgage, that was an aftershock 2 months later, because that was a fictional market. Why was this the earthquake? Everything in this civilization depends on fossil fuels from a period previous period of history. Our fertilizers and pesticides are made out of fossil fuels. Our construction materials are made out of fossil fuels. Our preservatives for our foods are made out of fossil fuels. Our pharmaceutical products are made out of fossil fuels. Our synthetic fiber, our power, our transport, our heat and light, it's all made out of fossil fuels. So when the price of fossil fuels, oil, goes over 80 a barrel, watch all the other prices go up. When we get to about $110 a barrel, prices become high for everything else and purchasing power starts to dive. We are now in a long, convulsive sunset for the industrial era based on fossil fuels. Prices go up to 114 a barrel, then they shoot down to 30 a barrel, then they go up to 80 a barrel. It is a end game. And where we have oil, mostly failed states. Where the oil is are failed states, mostly. So, does anyone here this morning think we are in the sunrise of the fossil fuel age? Anybody? But you know what? The big global energy companies, they are desperately trying to make the last amount of money they can. They're putting in oil pipelines and natural gas pipelines. They're moving everywhere from the Arctic to offshore to get the last remaining oil out. What do these men and women tell their children? This is evil. They know. So where do we go from here? Let me share an anecdote with you. When Angela Merkel became Chancellor of Germany, she asked me to come to Berlin in the first few weeks of her government to help her address the question how to grow the German economy, create jobs during her administration. When I got to Berlin, the first question I asked the new Chancellor is, Madam Chancellor, how do you grow the German economy when your businesses are plugged in to a second industrial revolution infrastructure of centralized telecommunications, fossil fuel energies and nuclear power, and internal combustion transportation for road, rail, water, and air, and that infrastructure to manage, power, and move German businesses, that infrastructure peaked in its productivity all over the industrial world 20 years ago. That's the problem why productivity is declining. So I said, you can have market reforms and labor reforms in Germany. You can have fiscal reforms. You can stimulate all sorts of new startups and innovation. It's not going to make any difference as long as your businesses are plugged into this old infrastructure of centralized telecommunication, fossil fuel nuclear power, internal combustion transportation. So on that first day with the Chancellor, we discussed a third industrial revolution, a new convergence of communication, energy, and mobility to manage, power, and move Germany. At the end of the day, the German Chancellor said, Mr. Rifkin, we will have this third industrial revolution for the next generation in Germany and across the European Union. I will report back on where we are at this point many years later. We are in the midst of a great revolution, and it's in this hall. It's in this convention center here. It's called the digital revolution. It is a third industrial revolution. All of you have smartphones on you right now this morning, correct? We have had a great digital revolution in communication. We have 3.5 billion people connected with smartphones now. And pretty soon, everybody's going to be connected. Do you know that China now has a smartphone for $25 with more computing power than sent our astronauts to the moon? There are literally villages in the Amazon jungles right now where they have this smartphone, and an individual has more computing power on their hand than sent our astronauts to the moon. This is a massive leap forward, potentially, to democratize the human family. Now this communication internet, which we all use, it's digital, is just now converging with a digitalized renewable energy internet. We now have millions of people in Europe and now China who are producing in their electricity cooperatives solar and wind electricity. And what they don't need, they're sending it back to an emerging digitalized renewable energy internet that acts exactly like the communication internet they're using this morning. And they're beginning to share energy the way we share information, news, knowledge, social blogs. This is in real time, here in Europe and Germany and now in China. These two digital internets, the communication internet, smartphones, iPads, computers, and now the digitalized renewable energy internet, made up of solar and wind energy across the world, is now converging with a third internet, a digital mobility and logistics internet made up of electric and fuel cell vehicles powered by renewable solar and wind energy from the energy internet. And these vehicles will then use communication, 5G, big data from the communication internet to manage autonomous, driverless road, rail, water, and air vehicles. These are the three internets: communication, energy, mobility, digital, digital, digital. And these three internets ride on top of a platform. It's called the Internet of Things. Everyone here is familiar with the Internet of Things? Okay, so we're putting sensors all across the built environment and the wild environment. Billions of sensors. And much of the exhibits here about these sensors, all through this convention hall, sensors. We have sensors in the agricultural fields, and they're monitoring the water levels in the ground for the crops. Unfortunately, that water isn't there in Germany this year. We have sensors in factories, in homes, in vehicles, in warehouses, in road systems, and these are smart sensors that are collecting big data. And that big data allows them the sensors to talk to each other and talk to us. And it allows those sensors to send data to the communication internet, the energy internet, renewable energy internet, and the mobility internet, so we can completely change the way we manage, power, and move economic activity, social life, and governance. That's what this is all about today in this convention hall. So by 2030, we will have built out a ubiquitous global sensing system. This is a prothesis of the human brain and nervous system. It's a prothesis. In other words, the brain is Galileo and GPS satellites, and they synchronize the sensors so the big data can coordinate. It's a brain and nervous system that brings together the human race. And what it means potentially is that all of us around the world, your generation, can begin to think of yourself as one human family. In all of your diversity, you can share all of your diversity with each other as a single human family, not just on Facebook, not just on Snapchat, not just on Twitter, but you can begin to share your whole lives with each other across an entire planet and democratize economic life. What this third industrial revolution does is it takes us from globalization to glocalization, glocal as in local, glocalization. If you understand how a general purpose technology platform is engineered, you know pretty much how the power literally is going to be distributed. I mean politically. For example, the first and second industrial revolution infrastructures that I talked to you about, they were engineered to be centralized, to be top-down, to be closed with intellectual property. They were designed to scale vertically with giant institutions to return investments to the shareholders. This globalization ended up this morning with 500 global corporations, only 500, and they control and are responsible for 33% of the GDP of the entire world. And they only have 62 million employees. It's massive. Well, now you know there's a lot of opposition to this kind of globalization. People are upset. They feel they've been left out. They feel that the rich are getting richer. They feel that their own families are not part of this new world. Well, here's what I'm telling you. The third industrial revolution is engineered, that platform of digital communication, energy, and mobility by design is engineered to be distributed. Think the cell phones, think social blogs. It's designed to be distributed, not centralized. It works best if it's open and transparent and not closed with intellectual property. Now, internet companies can try to monopolize it, or governments, but then they lose the network effect, because the more people in the network, the more everyone benefits. The more you monopolize the network to control it, the less productivity you get. And this third industrial revolution is designed to be laterally scaled. Everyone in your generation understands lateral power. You go up on a web, or you're up on a social media site, and the more people in the actual site, the more people are benefiting from each other's social capital. This third industrial revolution takes us from globalization top down to glocalization. We now have regions all over the world, cities, rural areas, that are beginning to develop the infrastructure for this third industrial revolution so they can virtually and physically engage other regions all over the world and bypass those big global companies. They can begin to work with them. They're not going to disappear, but regions are going to have more power laterally, region upon region upon region, to share this third industrial revolution infrastructure and engage locally so that they maintain their identity, they maintain their diversity, but they also enjoy relationships with the rest of the human family in economy and social life. This is power to the people. Literally, figuratively, power to the people. Now, that's the possibility. Now let me warn you about the problem. While this is a great potential emancipation, we have to deal with the dark net. And the dark net is as impressive as the bright net. How do we address the question of network neutrality and make sure that all of us have equal access to this global brain and nervous system? How do we ensure that governments don't control this brain and nervous system for political purposes, like Russia hacking the US presidential elections? How do we ensure that internet companies like Facebook, Google, Twitter, Amazon, Alibaba, how do we ensure they don't control and monopolize this brain and nervous system, this Internet of Things, so that they can take all of our data, commodify our whole life, and then sell it back to us in goods and services? How do we maintain privacy and data security? How do we prevent malware from disrupting the system every week? How do we prevent terrorism? The dark net is as impressive as the bright net, and your generation is going to have to be engaged, and your children and grandchildren, 3 generations, in political struggle against the dark net. And the way to struggle is to make this system redundant, redundant, redundant. The more distributed this system, the less vulnerable it is to monopoly or intervention by terrorism or malware. Because if some attack happens anywhere in the world, a climate event or a terrorist attack, you can go off-grid, you can decentralize, you can reaggregate, you can go back on the grid. If Puerto Rico had this system in place, which is now emerging in other places, they would have been back running in 3 days. They're still underwater 2 years later. This is not theory. This is being put into practice. So, what's the benefit here of this Internet of Things, third industrial revolution? Let's say that you're a small and medium-sized enterprise in Germany. You can go up already on this emerging Internet of Things and have a transparent picture of all the data. We got data flowing through the system. You can just go up there on your smartphone, cue into the data. Then you can take the data you care about for your business, your supply chain, and you can take it away from the rest of the data and mine it with your own analytics. Create your own apps so that in your business you can dramatically increase your aggregate efficiencies and productivity at every step of conversion across your supply chains, your value chains, your business, and dramatically plunge your ecological footprint because it's more efficient, and plunge your marginal cost. This is what all of this is about in these rooms you're seeing today, the story, the narrative that goes with all these little nice, interesting technologies. Without the narrative, you'll end up just with a lot of technology that is not connected. It'll go nowhere. So, where do we go from here? The introduction of this Internet of Things, Third Industrial Revolution, is so dramatic in productivity that it plunges your marginal cost. Now, I'll explain what marginal cost. Marginal costs are the cost after you pay your fixed costs for putting production online. You have to have fixed costs, you create your production, and then every single product or service you put out after that is the marginal cost, all right? So we always said the optimum market is where you sell at marginal cost. But we never expected a digital revolution so powerful in its generativity that it could reduce marginal costs really low. When your marginal costs get really low, your profits suffer. This means there's going to be, and already starting, a vast change in capitalism. I work with most of your German companies. And what's happening is when your margins get low, markets are too slow. In a market, you have a seller, you have a buyer. They come together. You make a transaction. The good or service is transformed, and then you're over. Then you come together again. There's a seller, there's a buyer. You make a transaction. It's over. Market capitalism is transactional. It starts, it stops, it starts, it stops. When your margins get low for profits, you have to move from capitalist markets to capitalist networks. You have to move from sellers and buyers to provider-user networks. We have to move from ownership to access to services. We have to move from consumerism to sustainability. We have to move from economic externalities to circularity and circularity. We have to move from the idea of progress to the idea of resilience. This is a pretty big transformation going on in corporate boardrooms and in SMEs. Some of the marginal cost, and the reason we're doing this is once you go to flow of services, even though the profits are low, you blockchain across industries working together to run these webs, and the flow of services is continuous. It's 24/7. So while the profits are low, you have a continuous flow of services, not start-stop markets, and you can make it on low margins. Some of the margins are becoming so low, that it's leading to near zero marginal cost, and that's given rise to the revolution in this room, the sharing economy. You are the revolution. It's called the sharing economy. Capitalism gave birth to this little sharing economy, and no one thought it was going to happen. No one saw it coming. Although I did write a book on it called The Age of Access in 2000, but my colleagues said that's a silly idea. But now it's happening among you millennials. The sharing economy is the first new economic system to enter onto the world stage since capitalism and socialism in the 19th century. This is a remarkable historical transformation. Some of the sharing economy is being absorbed by the capitalist system, like Uber and Lyft. Some of the sharing economy is parallel to the system, and some of it is oppositional, like Wikipedia. But in the sharing economy, what's interesting is, take a look at the results so far in the last 10 years in the communication internet. We now have 3.5 billion young people who are prosumers on the internet. Every given day, you are producing and sharing information, news, knowledge, and entertainment for free with each other, and it's not in the GDP. You're producing and sharing your own music, your own news and social blogs. You're producing and sharing your own YouTube videos with your cell phones. You're producing and sharing college courses, massive open online college courses taught by the best professors, getting credits. It's free. And you are beginning to democratize education. It's called Wikipedia. Wikipedia is the 6th largest website in the world. It's free. It's nonprofit. It only costs $50 million in charity to run, and we're democratizing education. We've done this in 15 years. I know that when I put something up on Wikipedia, a sentence, within 1 hour, there are people all over the world crawling around this sentence. I don't like this. You got to change that. You're wrong in what you said. So we're checking each other. And we have actually democratized education. And not only is it the 6th largest website, if you eliminate the pornographic websites, it's probably the #1 website in the world today, right? And it's free. So whole industries have been disrupted. The music industry, book publishing, journalism, newspapers, because of near zero marginal cost, the sharing economy. But thousands of new businesses have emerged, not just Google, Facebook, Amazon, Twitter. There are thousands of profit and non-profit cooperatives, and they're creating the platforms, they're creating the connections, they're mining the big data, they're creating the analytics and the apps. We thought there'd be a firewall, and while zero marginal cost would impact the virtual world, entertainment, news, knowledge, we didn't think that it would go over to the physical world. The Internet of Things, physical, that breaks the firewall. And this is the main thesis in my book, The Zero Marginal Cost Society. It's in German. If you get a chance, look at it. There's lots of it is free up on the sites, all right? So let's go back to Germany. What's happened since my first conversation with the chancellor? Today, this morning, 35 to 40% of all the electricity powering this room and all of Germany is solar and wind at near zero marginal cost. By 2040, we'll be completely off fossil fuels and nuclear power everywhere in Germany. You lead the world. What's interesting is the fixed cost. Back in 1978, the fixed cost of 1 solar watt, $79. One fixed cost, 1 watt. You know what it is this morning? It isn't $79 for that watt. It's 40 cents. It's 35 cents in 18 months from now. It's an exponential curve, just like computers. Now, you're too young to know this, but when I was born in World War II, we didn't have computers. The first computer was at my university, University of Pennsylvania. It's called UNIVAC. And at the time of the first computer, the head of IBM, the chairman of IBM, predicted that we would need a total of 5 computers for the world. 5. But what happened is the Intel Corporation engineers began to double the capacity on those little chips every 2 years. And now, smartphone, $25. This is what's happening now in solar and wind. They're on the same exponential curve. So what's interesting is we now have power and utility companies in Europe and America buying long-term contracts for solar and wind, 20-year contracts, because they see the curve at 5 cents, 4 cents, 3 cents, 2 cents a kilowatt hour. And here is what you're not being told. And your politicians either aren't being told or they're in the game with the energy companies. 2 years ago, Citibank of New York, the great bank, they issued a study, you can Google it up, and they said we now have $100 trillion in stranded assets in the fossil fuel industry. That is the largest economic bubble in world history. $100 trillion because solar and wind are so cheap, it's over for natural gas and oil and coal. They're still digging down. They're still putting in the pipelines. They're still doing the exploration rights. It's all stranded. It's worthless. Last year, Mark Carney, the president of the Bank of England, told Lloyd's of London Insurance, this is the big elephant in the room. This is the next big crisis. But once you pay for the fixed cost, The marginal cost of the electricity you're using in this room, it's near zero. The sun has not sent a bill to Germany. The wind has not invoiced Germany. It's free. So the fixed costs are plummeting, the marginal costs are plummeting, and the energy is nearly free. And what happens when German businesses can plug into a third industrial revolution infrastructure of 5G, big data communication, and that big data 5G communication internet is helping to manage energy that you're producing in your electricity cooperatives around Germany. And that means every business across its supply chain in every conversion of its business is using nearly zero marginal cost energy. That's the revolution. How does a second industrial revolution country compete with that? You can't. Who's producing all the energy? We have 4 major power companies in Germany: EMBW, RWE, Vattenfall, and E.ON. We thought they were invincible 12 years ago. What happened to them is what happened to the music industry and book publishing and newspapers. All over Germany, your parents, they may be farmers, small businesses, local neighborhoods, you all created electricity cooperatives. It's a different form of business. You share the revenue. It's a democratized business institution. All over Germany, you created electricity cooperatives. And you're producing 96% of all the new electricity for Germany, and the big 4 power companies are producing 4%, and they're gone. They can't do it. You know why? If you're producing coal, oil, and gas, you need these big corporations because it's centralized power. It's extremely expensive. But here's the thing. The sun shines everywhere. The wind blows everywhere. So you have to collect it laterally where you live, where you work, in your neighborhoods. Big companies can't scale that. Only cooperatives can. This is power to the people. This has happened in real time in Germany. Even little Denmark's done this. Anybody can do this. So, does this mean the end of the utility companies in Germany? Maybe not, but they have to change their business model. So a few years ago, E.ON, the great power company, asked if I would debate Mr. Tyson, their president. He's still there. And here's what I told him. I said, you're not leaving the second industrial revolution tomorrow morning, but the disruption's now. And if you don't move quickly, you're going to be history. But the transition is 25 years. So you need to have 2 business models. The old model, the legacy model, is a stranded asset. You have to carefully amortize it out of the market. At the same time, you need a new business model for the third industrial revolution. And in the new business, it's totally different than the old business. In the new power business, you don't generate any electricity. We're doing that, all of us. We don't need you to generate it. We'll sell what we don't want back to the power company. And you, the power company, make more and more money by selling less and less electricity. So wait a minute. You're not generating electricity at the power company, and you're making more money by selling less. He said, that's impossible. I said, no, it isn't. What you're going to do is you're going to set up partnerships, the power company, with thousands of businesses across Germany and Europe, and you're going to help manage the energy and big data from that energy flowing through the energy internet into their businesses. You're going to help them mine the big data on that energy flowing through their value chains and their supply chains so they can increase their efficiencies and productivity and reduce their marginal cost. In return for doing that with them, all those thousands of businesses will share back their productivity gains with the utility and power company in performance contracts. He went like this. He waited too long. Last year, E.ON put their fossil fuel and nuclear power divisions on the marketplace. No one's buying. But they're moving into services, and so is RWE and Vattenfall and EMBW. EDF in France, the nuclear company, they've joined us in northern France. My global consulting group is doing the big regions in Europe. We're doing northern industrial France, the Netherlands, Luxembourg. And EDF has been with us for 5 years, laying out the new infrastructure. They're not out of nuclear, but they know it's coming. The question is, can we get there in time? We've got to scale much quicker than we are, from pilots to scale. It's not just Europe, now China. I'd never worked in China. I'd never been in China. I was quite surprised when President Xi and Premier Li came into office. And you have a lot of folks here from China. They can tell you about this. When President Xi and Premier Li came into office, Premier Li put out his official biography. And I was totally surprised. He read the book, Third Industrial Revolution, that we published in 2012. And in his biography, he instructed the National Development Reform Commission and the State Council to begin immediately moving on the narratives I'm describing to you young people this morning. They move really quick in China. I've been working with the leadership ever since. Oh, they all miss this in the buses. You can share this with your fellow students later. So I've been working with China since that time, and let me show you how fast they move. 11 weeks after my first visit to China, the National State Grid, which is the largest electricity grid in China, they announced $82 billion to digitalize the entire national grid, state grid, so that millions of Chinese people could produce their own solar and wind in their neighborhoods, at their businesses, buying solar and wind from their own companies, because they're their largest producers, and then sell what they don't need back to the grid. This is in real time. Watch the European Union, watch China. They will lead. The coming together of the communication internet with the renewable energy internet, all digital, gives rise to the digital mobility and logistics internet on top of the Internet of Things platform. So digital communication internet, digital energy internet, renewables, digital mobility internet on the Internet of Things. Here's the problem. All of you young people here have created a crisis. Apparently, you do not want to own automobiles again. That's grandma and grandpa. 2 automobiles sitting in the driveway, doing nothing, waxing them once a month. You prefer to have access to car-sharing networks rather than ownership of vehicles in old-fashioned markets, correct? Well, this is the problem. Because for every automobile you are sharing in these car-sharing networks, we have to eliminate 15 cars from production. So we built the entire second industrial revolution around automobiles, and now you're saying we want access to mobility, not ownership of vehicles. And beginning with the millennials in this room, then your children and grandchildren, does anyone here think that your children and grandchildren are going to own automobiles? No, of course not. And this mobility internet is going to be made up of electric and fuel cell vehicles, all managed by the digital technology in this convention center. They will be electric and fuel cell vehicles. Countries in Europe and now China will outlaw the internal combustion engine in various times before 2050. You won't even be able to buy it. And these electric and fuel cell vehicles will be managed by digital technology, and they will be made out of fabrication, 3D printed, recycled material. All the automakers are working on it now, very cheap. And they will be driverless. Road, rail, water, air, drone, driverless, very low marginal cost. This is already emerging in the market, I should say, in the networks. This is what's in this convention hall this morning. Does this mean this is the end of the transport industry? Not necessarily, but like the power and utility industry, they have to change their business model. So, a couple of years ago, Wolfgang Bernhardt, at that point the chairman of Daimler Trucks, board of directors Daimler, he got a hold of me and said, can you come to Germany? We're going to bring journalists to Germany from all over the world and introduce the mobility internet at Daimler. So I came, I gave this narrative. Then Wolfgang Bernhardt surprised all the journalists by saying that they had quietly at Daimler outfitted 200,000 trucks with sensors all over the outside of the trucks, turning them into mobile big data centers. And those trucks are picking up data on weather conditions, traffic conditions, warehouse availability moment to moment, and they're going to use that big data so they can create relationships with thousands of businesses and help them manage their logistics so they never have to deadhead and they always have full loads and they can transfer their cargo to some other carrier if needed. So then Wolfgang Bernhard went to a helicopter in live time overlooking 3 big trucks on the German expressway, Daimler trucks. And then we started talking and watching the guys in the trucks and saying hello. And then Wolfgang Bernhard said to the drivers, take your hand off the wheel. Take your feet off the pedal. They had trained these drivers to be software analysts, and now they're looking at their computers and they're looking at the big data from their sensors. And guess what? The trucks then automated into a platoon, side by side like a train, autonomously down the German expressways in real time. Cool, right? You can see this up on Google. So this is the plan, a third industrial revolution, communication internet, digital, converging with a renewable energy internet, digital, converging with a mobility internet, digital, so that all of you in your generation can begin to manage power and move your day-to-day life in a much more level, democratized playing field, power to the people, not big global corporations controlling the agency of the human race. They'll still be here. They have a role to play, but they won't be the only player because the sharing economy is going to emerge side by side with the traditional capitalist system. Sometimes they'll work together, sometimes parallel, sometimes oppositional. This is good choices for you. Good choices. Last thoughts, second to last thoughts. How do we move this forward? We have a plan that was announced in Brussels in February of last year. I joined Vice President Meryl Sefcovic of the European Commission, and we announced Smart Europe. And the plan is to move this across the regions of Europe, not the nation states. Because this third industrial revolution is distributed, open, transparent, we have to move it at a level that's commensurate with the governance of this platform, which means the 350 regions of Europe are going to have power now. The nation states are still going to be here. They're going to create codes, regulations, and standards so we can move this forward. But what we've realized is that the best place for this to happen is in the local regions. When I first introduced this to Chancellor Merkel, she said at the end of the day, over a glass of wine, I like this for Germany. And I said, why? She said, you need to understand Germany. We are a federation of regions. The regions decide. Well, you know, in Europe, we have a principle that's in the European Constitution called the subsidiarity principle. How many people have ever heard of it? The subsidiarity principle. How many have heard of this principle? That's it. It's the basic principle of the European Union Constitution. It's been ignored up to now, which means that all power politically must start in the local region, not Brussels, not Berlin. And then whatever you need beyond that moves not up, but in concentric circles toward your nation state and the EU. Smart Europe, we announced it last year, is going to move region to region to region, and we are now in 3 test regions. All of northern industrial France, the old Rust Belt of Europe, the biggest industrial region of France today, the Netherlands, the petrochemical complex, and now Luxembourg. And this requires a new form of governance, which will interest you millennials and you younger ones. You're not even millennials, some of you are younger. Here's what it is. We said this system has to be distributed, open, and transparent, so is the governance. So at the regional levels where we're introducing this, the regions are no longer the deciders. The regional governments are only the choreographers and the facilitators. And their task is to call upon thousands and thousands of people in their region to set up peer assemblages, not focus groups, not stakeholder groups, ongoing peer assemblages, so they lateralize their regional government, and they have thousands of people engaged in setting up a roadmap, and hundreds of people in the primary committees, and we work with them to lay out this 30-year construction site to transform the region. But the actual plan and deployment stays with these assemblages for 3 generations. This is a completely new, different concept of governance. It's peer governance in assemblages so that we begin to bring political power to the people. Let regions control their destiny. You know what we found out? In northern industrial France, the Rust Belt, the old coal mining region. 3 years after they started this, they brought every locality together, every political party, they brought every township, they brought every university, every high school, every chamber of commerce together, and they collaborated rather than competed. And what we found out is this. 3 years after they began deployment of these roadmaps, they were given the award as the top entrepreneurial region of Europe. 5 years later, they've created thousands and thousands of new jobs, laying out the infrastructure. In the coal mining region, the grandsons and granddaughters of coal miners have been retrained in 9 months to retrofit buildings, install solar. This can happen in every region of Germany. You did well with the energy internet. Now each region has to lay out a roadmap and an infrastructure to move this to a third industrial revolution. In my last remarks, this. I don't think it's just about technology. We've got the technological platform that can move us quickly out of carbon within less than 40 years. And let me say I am guardedly hopeful. As bad as it is with climate change, here's why I'm only guardedly hopeful. We are the most social creature in the world. We have the biggest neocortex. When we have the narrative right, the human race moves quickly to transform itself. We laid out the entire first industrial revolution all over Europe and America in less than 40 years, the juvenile infrastructure. We did it. We laid out the entire second industrial revolution in the 20th century from 1905 to 1929. We did it. Why can't we do it this time? But it'll be up to the generation here in the high schools and the colleges that are digital natives, you understand the technology, to create the politics and create the entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship to make this happen. And here's why I'm guardedly hopeful. 3 reasons. 1, you are changing your concept of what freedom's about. That's crucial. 2, you're changing your idea about power. That's crucial. And 3, you're changing your ideas about identity to community. Freedom. For your parents' generation, all the way back to the beginning of the Enlightenment, we had a very specific idea about freedom. Freedom is the ability to be autonomous, to be self-sustaining, to be independent, to not be beholden to the other. The more autonomous I am, the less dependent I am, the more free I am. This is called negative freedom, and we all believed in this. But for all of you who are digital natives, that's death. Imagine freedom is the ability to be an island to oneself, to be autonomous, to be totally self-sufficient. You're cut off. For you, freedom is not exclusivity, it's inclusivity. It's not ownership, it's access. It's not an island to oneself, it's engaged in network after network after network around the world, correct? That's a totally different idea about freedom. Power, we thought power was a pyramid, all of your grandparents and great-grandparents, a pyramid, from the one to the many. But your generation on the internet, you realize that the more talent you provide free on these webs and social media sites, the more the sites get the network effect and it benefits your own social capital. That is lateral power. And lastly, my last thought, it is about community. I grew up in a post-Westphalian nation-state world where every nation is a sovereign and every citizen of a nation is a sovereign and autonomous. We're all autonomous. And each of us citizens compete with other citizens for scarce resources in the marketplace, zero-sum game, right? Our nation-states compete with other nation-states in the marketplace and the battlefield, zero-sum game. And I don't have to remind you, in Germany, we fought 2 world wars over energy. Coal in the Ruhr Valley. Coal in the Ruhr Valley, we had 2 world wars, and that led us to create the European Union. So, what we're seeing now, and you tell me if this is correct, we have a generation of young people coming home with biosphere consciousness, not geopolitical consciousness. The biosphere is 19 kilometers from the stratosphere to the lithosphere, the ground and the water, where all the chemistry and the spheres of the planet interact with the biology of life. We have young people coming home around the world, and they're saying to their father, Why are you using so much water while you're shaving? We have drought here and wildfires in this community. Turn it off. They're saying to their family, why is the TV on in the other room? We haven't been in there in 3 weeks. Turn it off. Wasting electricity. Why 2 cars? That second car hasn't been driven in 6 months. Car share one. And this is the one I particularly like. My wife and I are animal rights activists. Our fellow creatures have a right to be here whether we're here or not on this sojourn. This is their planet. They need their moment in too. So we've got young people coming home and they're saying, even in Germany, where did the beef come from on the plate? Where did that burger, where did that beef come from? Did it come from a rainforest? Because a lot of the cattle are being grazed on rainforests where they burn the trees to get 5 inches of topsoil to graze 1 cow for 1 burger piece of beef for a German table. And when they burn those trees down, there are animal species that only live in that particular ecosystem and they go extinct. We never hear their sound again. They never have a sound again. They're gone forever. And when those trees are burned to graze the cow for that hamburger or that piece of beef on the German plate, it means that the trees are no longer there to absorb CO2 from industrial emissions. That means the temperature of the planet goes up, and some farmer cannot feed her children in rural India because she's facing floods during the spring on her land and summer droughts and wildfires. That's because of the piece of beef. This generation is learning ecological footprint. The real cruel lesson of climate change, but it's an important one, is that everything we do, all of us, every moment of the day, intimately affects some other human, some other family, some other species, some other ecosystem. It's totally entwined, entangled in a complex, choreographed planet that we live in. There is no escape. So my hope is, with this generation, move forward. For those of your friends that were not here this morning, and for those of you who came late, we have produced a film. How many of you know Vice? Vice Media, V-I-C-E. Vice Media? How many know Vice Films? Okay. Vice is the largest media company under the age of 40 in the world. We did a film. Everything I've said here this morning is on YouTube. It's free. You just look up Third Industrial Revolution Vice. And over 3 million young people, almost 3 million young people have looked at this film in the last 8 months. Watch it, give it to your friends, take it to your teachers, share it in your communities. Last thought. I don't know if we'll make it in time. You'll be here to see. You're going to have children, and you're going to have grandchildren. You don't want your grandchildren to grow up in the world that our scientists are forecasting. It's a world beyond anything we can imagine in science fiction. If you think it's bad now with the floods and the wildfires and the droughts and the hurricanes, this is just the beginning. I believe we can do this. I believe the human family has the ability to come together and create this new transformation. It can be done in less than 35 years. We've done it before. But it means that everyone in this room, you go back to your schools, you go back to your communities, you go back to your parents, you go back to their businesses, and you say, why don't we have a roadmap for deployment in our region like northern France and the Netherlands and Luxembourg? Germany started this transition, but now you've got to actually scale it up, build it out, and show the world it's possible to create an ecological civilization so we can reflourish life and have the opportunity so generations not yet here, not just our own human beings, but generations of our fellow creatures not yet here can have their moment in this incredible experiment in the universe called life. Do it when you go home after this conference. Good afternoon. I've been told there are Q&A for a few minutes. Is there a few minutes of Q&A? Who wants to ask a question? We have a few minutes. Nobody? Come on. This is Germany. Okay, but let's have the students first. Any students want to ask a question? Please. No student in Germany wants to ask a question after this? We can't get anybody? Okay, go ahead.
How long will Donald be in power?
Good question, don't know. But we don't spend, I'm glad that we saw the results of this election. You need to understand that 60% of the American people are in disbelief at what we have in the White House. And they came out. The young people came out, the old people came out, the women came out, the minorities came out, and they've now controlled the House, and now a few of the Senate seats may reverse. But let me say to you, this is not the America we know. And you have to understand that a majority of American people understand this, and they're out voting, and they're out organizing, and most of them are young people now. They're 18, 19, 20, 21, 25 years old. They're organizing across America. So we hope things will change. Anyone else want to have a shot at a... Okay, okay.
You have talked about the failed states having the oil today. What will happen with these states in the future?
Well, it's mainly failed states, with the exception of the United States and Canada and Russia. They are not failed states. They have the oil too. This is really, we're at the end of the age of carbon and fossil fuels. That's what's going on. You know, there's an old saying in the Middle East. It's an old saying in the Middle East that my grandfather rode a camel. My father rode a car. I ride a jet. My grandson and granddaughter will be riding a camel. Meaning this was a small moment in history. The question is whether a younger generation across the Middle East, like all of you around the rest of the world, will join together as part of a human family and make this transition happen. It's a technical transition, it's an economic transition, it's a political transition, but more importantly, it's a worldview transition in how we think of ourselves and what our responsibilities are as human beings to the planet we live in. That's the only answer I can give you.
Thank you, Mr. Rifkin. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the conference.